Maybe. How
you doing, Michael? How you doing, Chris?
Yeah.
Just waiting for Joe now before we can start.
How you doing?
Hello, Mitch. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Chris. Can't see you, Michael.
Right, hang on one sec.
Can you see me?
There we go. Michael, your Wi-Fi is pretty slow.
Okay.
Just waiting for Joe now. How you doing, guys?
Yeah, really
Yeah,
good.
good, Mitch. Yeah.
Don't know where Joe is. Joe doesn't seem to be a Joe's not here. Sorry, guys. Find a way to get him in. So Joe's in apparently, but we can't seem to see him. And he's not on the... Very strange. Yes, I know I'm live, everyone. So welcome, everyone. But we're just waiting for one of our speakers. So I'm getting messages to say that he should be here in a second. So I do apologise, but you know, he should be here any second now. I have got my IT wizard, Darren, on the case with him at the moment. If not, then we'll start. But I may as well introduce who I've got on the moment. Michael Crowe, have you all seen Business Psychologist? He will do I really need Joe on this call. I'm really sorry, everyone. Okay, well, we'll start without him then. Right, so we are. I'm so sorry, everyone.
Deep breathe, Mitch.
I know, it's just that I can't find him, and he's not even on as a participant. So again, I apologise. There's always one, isn't there? I'm gonna. Okay. I'm putting stuff up. Joe, your reason is you're logged in as Darren. So Joe, you need to come out and log in as yourself. Unbelievable. Right. So for those of you, we're Nordens Chartered Accountants. I will be joined by Joe eventually. I've got Michael here as well. Michael's a business psychologist, and Chris Dyer, who is a director or manager at Metro Bank. Some of you on the call are clients of ours. Some of you aren't. This is our third webinar in 3 weeks. And the feedback we're getting has been absolutely brilliant. We've been really overwhelmed with all the thank yous and stories of all the keeping businesses alive that we're doing. And I think that, you know, if these webinars can help just one business, then great. That's the plan. But you know, hopefully this one will be just as good. We've brought in guests to help this one move forward. So look, what I want to say before we kind of get into, whilst we wait for Joe to eventually join, is look, don't bury your head in the sand and, hey, here he is.
Here he comes.
Well done, Joe. This is Joe, everybody. Thank you. Right, here we go. Right, look, first thing from me, don't bury your head in the sand. Psychology is really key now, and I think that's the reason why I wanted Michael to come on. And I think you can't make certain decisions as a business owner, as myself and from everybody else, and Chris, from your point of view as well as in banking, as a bank manager, you can't make key business decisions whilst being down in the dumps or thinking negatively, anxious or stressed. And it's something that business owners go through day in, day out, especially now. The worst thing that everybody can do is do nothing. And, although it's really important to remain positive, we also need to be realistic that it's whatever positive or negative, it's going to affect us in some way or another. Like I said, positive or negative, it's definitely going to affect us, this whole situation. But everyone will get through this, providing that you're thinking properly and you've got the necessary structure in place, which is what our webinars are all about, and which is what the guests on this webinar are gonna discuss as well. I've spoken to a number of business owners. I'm sure Joe and Chris will also say this as well, that a lot of people have been thinking from a place of negativity that they're going to go out of business and they're going to, this is the end of the world. But I think once you kind of start thinking more logically and you start to put your cash flow forecast together, which every single business owner should be doing, and Joe will explain more, you actually find out that, or they're actually finding out that the situations wasn't as bad as what they originally thought, and that they're actually gonna be able to survive and are working on more growth plans and looking at opportunities rather than thinking, oh, that's the end of the world. And again, it was because they were thinking from a place of negativity, which is easy to do. If you're watching the news, if you're looking at the papers, if you're listening to the voice notes that are getting circulated on WhatsApp and so on. And I think that's why it was really important that I wanted to get Michael on to talk about mindset. I think it's really important that we have to adjust quickly to the new world that we live in. And I think if we do, and if every business owner does, there's going to be some fantastic opportunities to not only stay in business, but to also grow and also take your business to new levels that you didn't think were possible. And I think right now, from doing the webinar and speaking with business owners 3 weeks ago, I think the initial panic is over. You can only look at the supermarkets. Everybody was out. The shelves are empty, panic buying. Now, it's not as bad anymore. Everyone's got stock in. So I think the initial panic is over with business owners. Some of you still may be panicking, but I'm talking as a majority. And I think now we're in the anxiety and stress area where it's how long is it going to last and how long can my business last during this period? And what can I do now to kind of get through this period and move forward more efficiently? So I think that's where we're at the moment. So I think right now as a business owner, I think we always want the pause button. Everyone always says, if I could hit the pause button, these are the things that I would do. Well, guess what? Now we have got the pause button. And I think that's can be looked at a really good thing, because there's things you can do now that you would never have had the opportunity to do before. Get on the cloud, start getting your use Zero, get your bookkeeping sorted efficiently, do your R&D claims, do your cash flow forecast, do work on your business rather than in it. Now is the perfect opportunity. We've got that pause button. So how it's going to go, this webinar. Okay, so the first thing I'll do is I'll introduce Joe. Joe is the head of our strategic consultancy division. He provides a lot of his department, his division, who are also on this call as participants listening in. They provide a lot of consultancy to businesses and helping them get to the next level and deal with problems and so on. So Joe's going to chat about what all business owners and what you should all be doing right now yourself, if not already, things including cash flow forecasts. He'll touch on furlough, how to plan ahead, all the things that are in place from the revenue, the VAT delays, the personal tax delays, and if you want to delay your corp tax, self-employed situation, and also any sort of funding that's kind of coming out from the government and so on. There's then we'll hear from Michael. So after that, Michael will chat about how to quiet the mind and make decisions. I think someone like myself, I've worked with Michael in the past, and I used to really suffer with making decisions because my anxiety and stress would be all over the place. And I think it's everyone I speak to about that. You know, everyone says, "Oh, that happens to me too." So I think what a great opportunity for Michael to come on. You know, especially right now in these circumstances where everyone's minds and all over the place, and people are going to struggle to make the right decision or key decision. So, Michael, thank you for coming in. I say thank you for coming in. Thank you for joining the call.
Thanks for bringing me in, man.
You need to sort your Wi-Fi out before you carry on. But
Okay.
Joe, and then we'll go back to Joe, who will discuss finance, banks, governments, what we're doing working with the banks, and what you're all gonna potentially have to do. And then we will finish off with Chris. Chris, thank you. I'm so grateful for you to come on. A lot of bank managers, the feedback I'm getting from bank managers is I say not burying their head in the sand, but they're so busy. There's a lot of negative press going on with the banks due to what the government is saying, and banks aren't prepared to kind of come out and talk. And I think, you know, I'm so grateful that you've been able to come on so we can hear things from your opinion and also what Metro's point of view is. So again, really appreciate you coming on board for this call. Can you turn your volume up?
I'll do my best.
Okay.
Is that better?
You're going to have to talk into the mic. Yeah. And then what we'll do is at the end, we'll go to a Q&A. At the bottom, you will see that there's a box at the bottom with Q&As. If anyone at any point wants to ask a question to any of us during it, we'll bring it, we'll discuss it at the end. Any question whatsoever. If you've got any personal questions, I think they're private, the questions, but any private questions, feel free to drop me an email at mitch@nordens.co.uk, and I'll be sure to follow it up with the necessary person after. So yeah, that's a bit about us. That's a bit about this call. First thing I do, Joe, listen, the last 2 weeks have been absolutely brilliant with the stuff you've been saying. Do you want to start with what you think business owners should be doing right now?
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Mitch. So yeah, firstly, apologies to everyone for keeping you all waiting for those couple of minutes while I was sorting out my computer. Thank you for being patient with me. So as Mitch mentioned, my name's Joe Sword. I head up our strategic consulting department here at Nordens. My goal for the call today is to share some useful information on what you can do yourself, and also the assistance that you're able to utilise externally from the government, etc., etc. The purpose of this will enable you to keep your business stable in the first instance, but then also talk about looking forward to areas of future growth. Now, it's really important you stay positive, as Mitch just alluded to, but staying positive and upbeat is only part of it. You need to act diligently, so it's vital, so important you don't bury your head in the sand. First thing you can do right now is to default to doing nothing. And it is really tough because it's so easy to do in these times where you're just feeling overwhelmed with everything. Now, Amelia in our office, she provided an interesting article earlier this week, which explained the 3 different zones business owners are in and ideally will transition through during this time. So first, it's the fear zone, where everything is scary and the underlying state is just one of complete panic. And once you've conquered that fear zone, you move on to the learning zone, where you begin to start relaxing a little bit, understanding, accepting the situation for what it is, reducing the emotion and shifting your focus to more positive areas. And then finally, you ideally, as soon as possible, move into the growth zone, which is where you start taking informed action, which will result in growth and improvements to both the business and your overall well-being. Now, it's great to have Michael on the call today, as he's helped me personally too to make a transition before I became a partner here at Nordens. And it allowed me to view things in a different perspective, which helped reduce my own personal frustrations really quickly. And I'm sure what he will do today and what he will share with you today will be of real value as you grapple with the uncertainties of the crisis that we're in. So as I've previously mentioned, and I'll continue to do so for as long as people have me on these Zoom calls, cash is really king, more than ever in the current climate. And we'd like to just get across some key things to consider today to help understand and preserve your cash position. So to start with, and we cannot emphasize this enough, every single business should be working with a weekly cash flow forecast at this point. Recent research has come out in the past week that 1 in 5 of all small businesses are going to run out completely of cash in this period. So it's vital that you know if and when that pinch will be for you to avoid being part of that 20%. So your cash flow forecast, it's your go-to tool to understand where you are and where you're heading, spotting those pinch points and those weeks where you're going to be sailing too close to the wind. So having this with you, it will ensure the decisions that you make in the coming months are as informed and correct as possible. And for those of you that need support and assistance here, we have some options. We've created a template for you and included that within our help pack for you to crack on and use. We're also here to help critique what you put together, work with you to build scenarios so you can not only have that plan A, but a plan B and a plan C and so on and so on. And finally, for those of you that need a bit more hands-on support, we can work with you to build a bespoke cash flow forecast for your business from scratch. By working together, we can unlock and consider different scenarios. And from working with clients over the past weeks, it's unanimous that once they've had a cash flow forecast prepared and can see and understand those pinch points, it already changes their mindset. Even going through the process during the meetings that we've had, you can see clients becoming more comfortable, more relaxed, more happy, more in control. And it's sort of a really, really good way for you to transition through those zones that I mentioned earlier, because having that already puts the control back in your hands. Now, thankfully, most clients that we're working with have produced some form of cash flow forecast already, which is great. And once we've set out that clear contingency plan around the cash, it's looking about not just stabilizing, but actually having that view to move the business forward. So the next 3 months are critical, but we also need to be working with a longer term view in mind. So to reiterate that in a nutshell of what I've just said, cash flow forecast, absolutely essential, and do something about it now if you don't have one. One of the next most important things to consider right now is making sure you have your books and records up to date. In light of the need for funding for so many businesses, which we'll discuss in more detail shortly, and just not only that, just to have better control and understanding of your business from a financial perspective, where it's actually positioned, where it is, how it's performing, it's more essential now than ever. The next thing to mention is your team. It's vitally important that you communicate effectively with your team. Team members will be looking to you as the owner for guidance. So things to consider here are having a regular communication plan where you're communicating clearly on facts and not just speculation. And we'd recommend that short and often is usually much better than long and infrequent. So short, sharp chats, but regular. Aiming to come across as upbeat and as positive as possible to keep the team motivated and aligned with you. We appreciate it is difficult, and hopefully Michael will share some tips on how you can help there. Ensure that you're acting correctly and legally from a HR point of view in respect to dealings with your team. Now, this is becoming more and more of a key area, and Sharon in our HR team has been flat out helping clients ensure they're set up correctly, providing them with invaluable advice on a wide range of HR issues that they're encountering. We've seen so many different scenarios, had so many questions come our way. So you really need to be doing that sort of health check to make sure you are doing the right things from a HR perspective. If you need any reassurance, it goes without saying, just contact us and we'll arrange for Sharon to have a chat with you.
Sorry, Joe, on that, I think it's worth saying that although everything that's going on is going on, employment law is still the same and it will continue to be the same. So I think that, just because something you do now in these day and age with what's going on might come back and bite you in the future. So it's so important that you have everything from an HR point of view tidied up. Sorry.
Yeah. So it's also important that where possible, you've ensured that your team is set up as much, wherever possible, as much as possible to carry out their work remotely. Make the most of apps such as this, like Zoom, which offer free use for a limited period of time. And it also means that you can carry out the equivalent of sort of what we're doing today is the equivalent of a face-to-face meeting to an extent. So it allows you to carry on doing some element of work. Another thing to mention will be looking at having regular dialogue with your customers. So chasing for payment and having a clear credit control process is more important than ever. And the information that you get here will help make your cash flow as accurate as possible. So you need to understand whether you're going to be experiencing significant delays for the money that you're due in to help with these forecasts. And if you work closely with one or a couple of select customers, it will be worth having a bit more in-depth chat to discuss advance or interim billing for work that you've either started on or about to start. Because in a lot of cases, that money's sort of owed to you already. So if you can get that in earlier, in any way, shape or form, it will definitely help. At this time, it's also worth considering how the business can pivot, if it can pivot at all. Thinking about whether there are any ways that you can offer your service remotely, either packaging them up online, virtually, or looking at a way to use your expertise to provide some form of like off-site consultancy. Now, we would like to think that after this has died down and we're back to a relative degree of normality, businesses and business owners will all be raring to go. So perhaps you can look at helping your customers with an element of their own post-coronavirus planning to see what they're actually doing about from their end, and there might be a way you can help them. So the Zoom seminars like the one we're putting on today for us have been a really valuable way to keep in contact with a wide variety of clients and contacts. So it'd be worth just considering whether something like this would also be applicable to your business. I've had a chat with a few of the clients I work with recently about this. Another thing to mention is considering tax reliefs. Now, one tax relief that's probably the most misunderstood and underutilized in my mind is research and development. And probably the best thing about research and development is actually a potential cash repayment due to businesses should you qualify. So what I'd recommend is to check out the video that Mitch and our colleague David did recently, which covers what is a really technical subject in really simple terms. And the key message really around that is explore it. You've got time at the moment, or most people have a bit more time than usual. So look into this, explore it, because there is a potential cash repayment out there.
Yeah, it's worth saying that one of our clients, I think they just got back about 300 grand in R&D, and they didn't realize they were even going to qualify for it. So it's definitely worth looking into.
Yeah, and that's the thing. A lot of businesses are really unaware of it, and the qualifying criteria sounds quite small, but it's actually really wide ranging in a lot of cases. So it's definitely worth considering it, even if you can just check it off the list as another thing that you've explored. So moving back on to, like we've said about the customers, it's also important that you're speaking to selected suppliers, your landlords and your lenders, to reduce rates or agree a payment holiday, both for the business and for you personally. And I think just being open and honest with them, as a lot of them will be going through the same thing and will understand where you're coming from. So you're likely to get some sort of payment holiday reduction in rates or some sort of compromise there. And most lenders, and Chris will probably elaborate on this when he comes on, are being quite open when it comes to payment holidays. So it's definitely something to look and explore further in terms of building your overall short cash flow contingency. A couple of final things to mention. For businesses that deal in foreign exchange, you should be exploring the hedging options around that to make sure you're protected as much as possible. And consider your insurance that you have in place. Although a lot of insurance policies are likely to exclude pandemics such as this, policies do differ. So we would encourage you to just have the conversation with your insurance provider, just again to double check if nothing else. So they're kind of a wrap up of the things that I think you should be doing, simple basic things that you should just be doing now to give yourself the best chance. What I'd like to just briefly mention now is about planning ahead. So as we've mentioned, we're in a transition. It started. Things seem, as recent news updates, seem that things are getting a bit better, but we will come out of this at one stage or another. And what this situation has done, one of the few real positives in our mind, is give business owners, like Mitch alluded to, the time they've been wanting for so long to actually stop, pause, take a check on their business, step outside and apply focus to enable them to spend that precious time working on their business instead of just being dragged down and subsumed within the day-to-day operations. And the businesses that are taking advantage of this time and putting together some real clear actions, putting together a robust plan, they will be the ones that are best placed to spring out the other side and not just creep out of it, but really push and explode out of it, fast forward themselves. So Areas that you should be considering as part of your planning are critically evaluating your business model. The additional time will give you the chance to really evaluate all the key aspects of your business. So how will you retain your strengths that you currently have within your business? How do you retain your USPs? How do you keep them sustainable for the future? How do you continue being the best at what you are, at what you do? Looking at, from the other side, how do you look at and address your weaknesses? And how can you look to turn those into strengths over time? What opportunities do you have within the business? What the crisis has actually done is it's opened up a lot of opportunities for the most agile and focused businesses. So it's really important that you're looking at those opportunities clearly and with a bit more of an idea about how you can start exploiting them, because there are opportunities out there for the businesses that are doing the right things. And finally, what threats do you have at the moment? What safeguards are you putting in place to have these? So obviously, like we've said, the current crisis, it's brought a huge challenge for businesses in various ways. And unfortunately, it's not going to be the last threat your business ever faces. So it's important that you take these learnings on board to put measures in place, do everything you can that should a crisis, not like this, but perhaps slightly different, raises its head again, you're as best placed as possible to adapt to that. Other things to look at are positioning you and your team for the future. Most business owners, like I mentioned, are very, very busy carrying out operational work on a day-to-day basis, and they struggle with getting that balance between working in and working on the business. So what this does is it gives you a chance to critically assess each of the roles and responsibilities in your business and ask yourself the question for each of those roles. Can I empower someone further down the line of command to take responsibility for this area going forward? And with it, when we've done this with other clients, what we're likely to realize is there actually are quite a lot of yeses when you're asking yourself that question. And it's just kind of giving you the freedom to let go of those reins and say, look, I'll monitor it, I'll coach it, I'll let that person take over gradually, but it will allow you more free time for when the business gets back into full flow. So you can do the most valuable things as much of the time as possible. So other things to consider, assess your cost base. What this has also done is it's given every business the kick to start saying, right, I'm going to stringently assess every single one of my costs because cash is now tighter than ever and I cannot afford to be paying for things that I don't need or don't value. Create your post-coronavirus or within coronavirus marketing drive. Who, what, why, where are you targeting? Review and analyze data that you've been collecting for ages and have just not had a chance to do anything with it. It's a perfect time to be starting to use this sort of information. And then finally, probably the most important thing is looking at your personal goals. So at this time, everyone's probably appreciating, it's probably resonated them more than ever, that health and family really come before everything else. So this time will enable you to look properly at why you're actually in business. What are you doing this for? What is your purpose? What do you actually want to achieve in the medium to long term? And that, once you're clear on it, will act as the target for the future planning. So our strategic team at Nordens are perfectly placed to help with this sort of stuff. And the post-coronavirus exit plans we've been working on with businesses are really shaping up well so far. What we do is we work to dig deep with you and find the true underlying goals of why you're actually doing this, the real reason you do what you do and what you want to achieve. And once we've got this clarified and nailed down, we'll work with you to set out how that vision and dream can become a reality by setting financial and team targets and milestones, which you'll check off, and then you'll be able to see each step of the way and see your progression, gauge your progression towards those goals. So what that will do is it will give you a sense of achievement, but also clarity leading to keeping you motivated that you're on that right path and taking steps towards that end goal. And from the work that we've been doing and conversation we've been having with clients, that just feedback has been that just speaking to someone dramatically helps. So like I mentioned previously on the other calls, the saying goes, a problem shared is a problem halved, and we are here to help you turn that problem into a solution. So for this first section, the 3 key points for you to take away are, number 1, ensure you have a fully working cash flow for the next 3 months. And once you've looked and analysed the next 3 critical months, stretch this for the next 12 months to see how you're looking to branch out from this coronavirus pandemic. Number 2, do everything that you can to have conversations with your team, your suppliers, your lenders, your customers to enable you to be in that best position to continue to trade and at the same time preserve your short-term cash. And number 3, plan ahead. Seize this opportunity that we have now. Seize this pause button to work on your business and come out with a clear vision and purpose so you can maximize your ability to fast forward once we get back into some kind of normal. Now we can also help. We've got a corporate finance team here at Nordens, and we can help you, assist you with your funding options and clarity over other areas of the government support. And I'll come on to that shortly. But for now, it's back to you, Mitch, and that's it for me.
No, I appreciate that, Joe. And I think just to reiterate, cash flow forecasts so key right now, especially, and I guess you'll come onto it more when it comes to raising finance and funding. That's going to prove crucial in that area as well. So yeah, and HR as well. Anybody who has any form of staff, get HR support. If you need help with it, we can help with it, but get HR support, because it is something that could come back and bite you in the future, because there's, the employment law is still employment law, coronavirus or not. So it's really important. But thanks, Joe. I really appreciate that. And we'll hear back from Joe, and Joe will come back and discuss all the funding options that you've got now to finance now. I think the first bit was talking about how to gear up for the future, and find the opportunities. But we will go through the furlough option. We will go through the raising finance from the bank, the government grants, and so on. So for people that are asking questions in the Q&A box, we will cover what you're asking. Look, I want to introduce Michael. So Michael is, let me unmute you. I muted you for some reason, sorry. Right, you're unmuted. Have you sorted your Wi-Fi out, Michael?
Well, can you hear me?
There we go. Well done. Brilliant. So this is Michael Crowe. Michael has worked with us for a number of years, played a huge part in my life, turned me from a child to a man, I would say. Without Michael, I wouldn't be in a position. I mean, it's the truth. And Michael works with a lot of our clients as well. But I think right now, like I mentioned before, we're over the initial panic, in my opinion, and it's more, well, I'll let you carry on from here, but stress and anxiety in business owners' minds, which allows them to make key decisions. That's something I want you to talk about, because I think it relates to absolutely everybody. So yeah, Michael, take it away.
Cheers, Mitch. Yeah, it's lovely. I've worked with Nordens for 7 and a bit years. And I guess, yeah, I met Mark Norden and Mitch and Joe that period ago. And as they've grown and developed, you see what they're doing, what they're able to connect to the people around them and actually commit to change. So it's fantastic. I'm on one of these calls with them. I guess ultimately my experiences, I've worked in the field of coaching, training, psychology, helping people for 25 years. And I guess ultimately what people look for is, what's the mindset that creates change? And Joe's kind of typified 3 different phases that businesses are in at the moment. So if there is that fear phase, ultimately what you're looking at is, and the fear phase, from what I kind of term it, fear, and the learning phase is the recovery phase. So if we've kind of hit the point of recovery, there's a whole subset of businesses out there that are struggling, going to be thinking, where do I go? What do I do? They go to Nordens and other trusted advisors for help. And what you're trying to figure out is, how do I manage the anxiety in me as a business owner, the anxiety and stress that might be coming through the decisions we have to make, given the current situation, the current crisis, and then actually what do we do to prepare for growth? And you've got to figure out, how are you showing up for your clients, the ones you currently have, and how you're showing up for your staff, that allows you to kind of take steps forward. And Joe's kind of been some indication of how to do that. What I'll talk you through is probably 5 different ways. I've done some work with Nordens and with a lot of my other clients to help, very simple things to help you be mentally ready, resilient in the face of adversity. And I guess what we can start at is, as we're in this recovery phase, and if it's, as Mitch is saying, it's typified initially by panic and lots of stress, and now it's just a bit of anxiety. The people, the organizations that move from an anxious position to a confident position, what they're able to do is actually position themselves different to their competitors. They're able to create opportunities, they're able to pivot super quickly. And I guess one of my clients, a group called Cure Leukemia, they're a charity, And what they've done, which is very different to a lot of other charities, is instead of going with cap in hand to we're struggling, we need funds to help us, what they're figuring out is how do they pivot on the events they do and actually earn money without needing to be physically with people. And what their leader is doing exceptionally well, and which I've seen in other types of leaderships, is they are positioning, they're communicating, they're working from positions of confidence around their decisions. They're getting in a flow state that actually allows them to be mentally agile around their communication, around their own managing stress and anxiety. And what that does is it positions you differently. You have a different energy about you that allows you to connect with others and make faster decisions. So I guess part of what you do, and Joe's said that they're doing this in the strategic department, is first one is take stock. So take stock of your financial position, take stock of your personal position. If it's just your career, what's my career position now? And ultimately, what's your team position? And once you accept that, once you've understood where you're at, then you've done some heavy thinking, and it's moved you out of a point of stress and anxiety that usually sits in your heart. It gets pumped around your bodies as chemicals such as adrenaline and cortisol, and actually starts to calm part of your central nervous system down. And ultimately, what you're looking at is how do you start to do some different thinking that actually rewires those neural pathways that allows you to make different decisions moving forward. So I guess an example is I've been caught in the same crisis. I've had 60% of my clients put work on hold, a couple have disappeared. And what it's allowed me to do is create time with my girls. Mitch was involved in one of them the other day when he started WhatsApping my daughter turned 8 yesterday, but she replied to Mitch when she was on my phone. So what it's allowed me to do is take stock of my personal situation and actually re-engage and be super present with my daughters. It's allowed me to figure out what's the pivot I need to do in my business that allows me to work in a way that's online, that supports people. It's to deliver my recovery, offering my recovery package as opposed to a growth package. And so have a think about how to take stock of where you're at. Where's your own stress and anxiety at this moment? Because and this is kind of some of the work I've done with Mitch and others, is when you're an elite athlete, when you're a performer and you've got into that flow state, what you're finding is the three parts of your brains work, your brain and your body work really well. So if you start to look at the brain as three subsets, the top part, the neocortex, makes lots of heavy decisions. It's like the filing cabinet where all the data sits in the brain. The limbic part is the more emotive part of your brain, and the basal is the base stem that you're born with, that you kind of slowly evolve from. I've got a 3-year-old who's only 4. She's in that basal part where she's crazy and everything's adrenaline and doing stuff, and she doesn't do lots of heavy thinking yet because she can't. But her 8-year-old sister is in that thinking phase. And so as you learn these three parts of the triune brain, they call it, what it allows you to do is actually think, where am I thinking at this moment? Am I thinking from a point of emotional context, the limbic part of the brain? Or am I thinking fight or flight, how to manage myself right now? I'm stressed, everything's coming at me, adrenaline's coursing through my body, what do I do? Or are you thinking and considering and debating options? And so when you get the three parts of your brain to kind of coordinate with each other, and you start to go, I've done the thinking, I've managed some of the emotional content that comes with that, and the brainstem goes, oh, got it, that makes sense. And when you flow that into the whole brain, what you're able to do is you're looking at how the brain connects with the heart, and then that communicates with the gut. Because an athlete or a performer, or you doing your best possible hobby or activity, when you're in a flow state, you don't overthink, you just do. And what that allows you to be is you're in a neutral energetic state. You're not high energy, you're not low energy. Things just happen. It seems slower when you're doing that. So Mitch and I have talked about his football career. We've talked about how do we look at his leadership position, the big smile. Are they the medals in the background, mate? Is that the?
Don't worry
Yeah.
about those. It
Don't
looks
worry
like
about
there's
you.
only
Yeah.
two, but I've got a few hundred. So, yeah.
What it means though is when you're at your best, what I get people to do is think of a time when they're in that flow state. And the brain's a very elastic thing, and it allows you to consider those feelings, those thoughts. And as you do it, physiologically, your body starts to remember them and it gets back in that state. And so when you get into that flow state, you have a calmer central nervous system. You're able to do things clearer. And so Joe talking about, here's where we're going with your business and here's some cash flow that gets you there. You've done some heavy thinking, you've considered options. You're starting to go, we can't do this, we're doing this now, here's how we're proceeding, here's our opportunities, here's our pathways, here's our way forward. And then you start to go, actually, that makes sense in my heart. My heart is now sending around some endorphin. I have a clear goal. I have some milestones that I can start to look at, as opposed to adrenaline and cortisol and other chemicals that mess with my systems that affect depression and anxiety and my sleep. They're actually going, I'm controlling them, I'm managing them. So have a think about, where are you thinking at this moment? Are you more in the top part of your brain, over processing stuff, lots of facts and figures? Or are you more emotionally thinking? Or are you more fight or flight? Because that will start to dictate, are you in the fear element of recovery, or are you starting to move into a learning phase? The second part then is, have you done that thinking? Have you created the time and the energy to actually go, here's where I'm going? You create vision for the future. Here's the clarity of what we are doing as a business. Here's the clarity around what I'm doing as a business owner. And does that map onto how I feel inside my heart? Does it connect to me? And when it connects, you'll start to feel the brain and the heart going, okay, that makes sense. That's moving me forward. And when it works super well, it's like you've spent 30 minutes doing really great exercise, doing a yoga session, you've done some deep breathing, you've done some meditation. It actually calms you down, and that's when that zone state kicks in. With that zone state, you're then able to go, how is my energy in managing the people around me? Am I pulling energy from everyone around me, or am I giving energy to people? So don't think, oh, I'm stressed, I need to move away from people. I actually go and spend more time communicating with them. Create a quiet space to create perspective that allows you to do that strategic planning, that allows you to assess where you're at. What you're starting to do is actually, when you start to do that calm, deep breathing, as that zone state kicks in, the endorphins and the dopamines of the feel-good factors start to flood your system, and you feel, okay, I feel a bit more at ease. It allows you to be ready for what growth phase looks like. And I guess ultimately, and I'll send this link via the webinar, but I've done some research. I've been doing research all my career, but one of the things I found recently is there are 10 songs that this lady has created on the Spotify list that actually reduce your anxiety. And the top one, which is called Weightless by Marconi Union, was developed in conjunction with sound therapy and neuroscientists, and it reduces anxiety by 65%. And so if you're able to do activities such as listening to music or exercise, I was trying to teach my eldest one how to do boxing the other day to kind of clarify her mind and get her calm and centered. What that starts to do is it prepares you for the next conversation with a client or with your supply chain or with your team. And ultimately, everything you start to do is you're nudging a behavior to create the mindset you want. You can't create this mindset straight away, but I guess what Mitch and the team have done over time is they've slowly built a repertoire of behaviors that actually create this wider package. So if I kind of reiterate back over some of the key things, take stock of your financial, personal, career, team position, figure out where you're at. Get your head, heart, and gut aligned, figure out how to create time and space to do deep breathing, to do some meditation, to create your own neutral energy position that actually starts to bring energy back into you that you can then give to others as you help them. Spend time doing calm breathing. The interesting thing is, I know this with my nearly 4-year-old, is if I watch her sleep, she breathes deeply in her belly. And over time, adults have unlearned that behavior. They breathe mostly out on the top of their chest. And so when you're stressed, you tend to breathe up here, and the deep breathing that you need to do to kind of regulate your emotional control actually comes from doing deep belly breathing and slowing everything down, regulating to get you in the right state. So take stock, head, heart, and gut aligned, get that calm, deep breathing, figure out how to rewire, how to nudge those neural pathways to actually create time to be in the zone. Think of an activity. Think of a time when you've been at your best, whether it's a performance when you were 12 or when Mitch and I talked about his football, or Joe presenting in front of 300 people, that allows you to go, actually, I was in control of that. And those endorphins flood your system and you feel great. Once you feel great, it's a bit like riding a bike. You've done it once, or you've learned to drive a car. You just keep practicing and practicing and practicing. So eventually you can click it on and it works. And I guess the last thing is create time and perspective. The current environment has given you time. It's probably not the time you wanted, but it's created time for you. And so ultimately figure out how to spend time assessing in a quiet space. It might be hard if you live in a house full of people, but create time and space to assess your options. What can I do moving forward? Where can I go with this? What can I do? But ultimately, when you're doing a lot of these decisions, they're very simple things. It helps you be prepared and emotionally ready, and you're holding a positive, resilient, I call it the bounce back ability mindset that allows you to be focused and gain attention for where you want to go.
No, Michael, that's absolutely brilliant. I think you've played such a part in my life and Nordens' life, from practice and teaching us to practice things like that. And I think from speaking with business owners, there's like a blockage of stress and anxiety that are stopping them making decisions. And I think it's so important to remove those stress and anxieties to be able to make key decisions. And especially in the stuff that Joe's doing with his strategic consultancy, part of, it's all about getting businesses from A to B. And I think part of it is you have to remove that stress and anxiety. It's so key. And I think you mentioned meditation. We're actually going to create a video, and if anyone's interested in it, please send me an email, mitch@nordens.co.uk, a business meditation video for all business owners to we're not going to send it out to everyone. It's only people that are interested, to hopefully help remove that stress and anxiety using deep breathing. But yeah, Michael, there are I've had questions for you, which we'll come to at the end. So if you can hang around, then great.
Yeah, definitely.
So no, I really appreciate you coming on, and we'll hear back from you in a bit. And thank you for sorting out your internet connection.
Thank you.
Just. Okay, so now I think we've heard from Joe originally talking about opportunity. We've heard from Michael talking about removing stress and anxiety. I want to go back to Joe. Chris, I'm leaving you till last, so you can just carry on waiting there. Joe, can you unmute yourself? I can't seem to do it. So Joe, now we're going to talk. I've had some questions about finance. I think, Joe, if you can go through now, what's available now for business owners to get, with furlough, with loans, with finance. Do you want to kind of, I know we spoke about it in the last 2 weeks, but I think everyone wants to know what's available to them right now.
Yeah, no problem. So obviously there's various initiatives that have been announced by the government. So I'll run through them, some headlines, some a little bit more detail, but if anyone does have any questions, just pop them in the Q&A box and we can answer them at the end. Hopefully we'll answer some as we go along. But if we start with furlough, it's definitely the word of the last few weeks, isn't it? But what exactly is furlough? So furlough, or furloughing workers, is the word used to describe the government's initiative which is designed to help businesses keep their workforce in employment where they would have been laid off due to the outbreak. So the government in principle have committed to paying back employers 80% of the wages of all furloughed workers. And many questions have been asked around this. And what I thought it would be good to do is thank you to our payroll team and our HR team who have helped compile the kind of list of FAQs that I'll go through now. Obviously, it's not completely comprehensive. So if anyone does have any questions, like I said, put them in the Q&A box and we'll speak to us separately afterwards. But if I just go through them all, hopefully it will answer quite a lot of the common questions that we are being asked ourselves. So first question, can I furlough all of my staff or just some of my staff? You can furlough all of your staff or some, but you should use your judgment and not discriminate against anyone when deciding on which staff to furlough. Can a furloughed member of staff carry out work? An employer cannot ask a furloughed worker to do any work that makes money or provides services for the organisation. They can carry out training and volunteer work, but basically if the work they're doing leads to some form of income, I would recommend they do not carry out that activity while furloughed. How long can a worker be furloughed for? The scheme is currently open for 3 months. It's subject to an extension, but at the present moment, it's open for 3 months. And a worker can be furloughed for that entire time. There's a minimum period once you put someone on furlough of 3 consecutive weeks. They have to be on furlough for 3 consecutive weeks for it to be eligible, so to speak. Employees can be furloughed multiple times, but each separate leave must be for a minimum period of 3 consecutive weeks. So you can't chop and change within that. It has to be 3 consecutive weeks, and then you can stop and then you can go again, so to speak. What do I need to do to furlough a worker? So to be eligible for the grant, employers must confirm in writing to the employees that they've been furloughed, and a record of that communication must be kept for 5 years. So what generally most of our clients are doing, they're speaking to our payroll team or HR team who have provided them with a template to use to send to their team members that have been furloughed. The team members have had a conversation with the employers, they've agreed to being furloughed, they've signed it off, and then they're providing that back to us so we can keep it on file. That is all the documentation we need at the moment, although as things develop, things might come out and we'll let you know, but right now, that's what you need to be doing. I'm a director/salaried director. Can I be furloughed? The answer is yes. The board of directors can decide that directors should be furloughed and the decision needs to be noted in the company record. So furloughed directors can still carry out the statutory duties on behalf of the business. But again, they cannot carry out work that will generate commercial revenue or provide a service that will lead to revenue on behalf of their company. So I think it's more of a common sense approach. If it's something like just collating your books and records, I don't think that would qualify as working. I mean, it's not crystal clear, the guidance, but I think using the common sense approach, and we've spoken with ICAW about this and the professional bodies who are all of the same agreement there. What can be included in furlough pay? So standard basic salary, regular payments that an employer is obliged to pay. So anything that's compulsory, and that does include commission, providing it's compulsory. If the payment is discretionary and subjective, then it cannot be included. And the terms of employment will say whether the payments such as commission are compulsory or discretionary. But if you're having any issues around that particular area, speak to us because we'll be able to have a look at your employment contracts and see what it says and give you the best bespoke advice for your personal situation there. The next question, I haven't got money to pay my staff, so can I just wait and pay them when I receive the payment from HMRC? This is a big no-no. The terms of employment state the date salary should be paid, and not adhering to this would be a breach of contract, so it could cause you a lot of problems if you start messing around here, so to speak. Therefore, if you're having any trouble paying your team, you need to look at other options to ensure they do get paid when they should be paid. When and how will I receive the money? So the first claim to be made on the online portal that the government are busy setting up is expected to be by the end of April. Payment will come directly into the business bank account of the employer. We don't currently know how long it will take for payments to actually be made, but we're checking for updates on a daily or probably in a case of our payroll team, probably on an hourly basis. And as soon as anything develops, we'll let you know. The next question, can we retrospectively open a PAYE scheme and run the payroll and claim furlough? Now, this is quite a common one and it's quite a natural one to see if there's a way that we can sort of get around the rules, so to speak. But the advice from our payroll team is that the company payroll scheme has to have been set up at February 2020, and it's too late to open one up now. If Nordens run the payroll, we will make the claim, or does the client need to make the claim? So we're currently assessing this, and we'll let clients know in due course once the portal is up and running and everything's working about how and who and what needs to be done any further than what we've already said. But for the time being, just stick to the standard stuff. Identify the furloughed employees, fill out the template, get them to agree it, get them to sign it, send it back to us, and make us aware who you're furloughing, so we have all the records, so we'll be able to easily deal with it when it's necessary. Can you insist your employees use their annual leave during this period? Now, this is quite a good question. We've got asked this question quite a lot. The guidance at present is that you cannot insist on this. You can't force people to take holidays, even though they won't be working and they'll be furloughed. So no is the answer to that. And the last question is, I forgot to put my grandma, auntie, daughter on the payroll back in January. Can I just add her on and furlough her? No, the employees needed to be on the payroll on the 28th of February. HMRC have made it pretty clear they're going to be carrying out an audit on the furlough and the furloughing process further down the line. And the payroll gets filed in real time anyway, so it will be very, very obvious that something has happened there. So unless it's a real genuine oversight and you have significant documentation and backup to prove that it should have happened, in our mind, it's just not even worth taking the risk. So that covers the kind of the frequently asked questions we've been asked around furlough. I'm sure there are others, but that hopefully will help answer quite a few of them.
If anyone's got any questions, again, throw them in the Q&A box or email, and we'll cover them anyway at the end.
So before moving on to the loan funding initiative, I'll talk about in a little bit more detail before Chris comes on. I'd just like to briefly go through all the other initiatives the government have announced. And if anyone's listened to the webinars before, not that much has changed, but a few things have changed. So just listen up, just in case you missed it on the last one. So if I start with the tax and the taxation landscape. So initially, the government's first reaction when all this really broke was that our time to pay team will be a bit more flexible with you, and they're willing to work and support businesses during this time. That was their initial stance. So basically, you could call up and get a payment arrangement in place. Since then, they've gone a step further. So they've confirmed that they're going to defer VAT liabilities from any VAT liability from March the 20th up until the end of June will now not be payable until March 2021. That's an automatic deferral. It just kicks in. Obviously, from HMRC's point of view and cash flow permitting, if you want to pay that earlier, then they're more than happy to take the money. Self-assessment payments on account for self-employed people, and we'll come on to self-employed in a little bit more detail in a second, but self-employed payments on account or payments on account in general for anyone under self-assessment that are payable in July 2020 are now deferred until January 2021 as well. And in respect of corporation tax, I actually spoke with HMRC myself yesterday regarding corporation tax, and they confirmed that any corporation tax liabilities due in March, April or May will be subject to a similar deferral like VAT. It will just be an automatic 3-month deferral though. It won't be deferred as far along as the VAT one is. So you'll get 3 months from the payment date with sort of no questions asked. Interest will still be charged at present, however, but a lot of the clients that we're speaking to are reasoning that that's a small price to pay to keep their tax money in their account for another 3 months. So in a nutshell, regarding taxes, our immediate advice would be don't make any taxation payments until you've spoken with your client manager here at Nordens and they've assessed your situation. Because in a nutshell, once that precious cash has gone from your bank account, it has gone, and it's very, very difficult to get it back, especially if you're not trading at the moment, to replace it. So we can work with you to look and gauge and selectively gauge the timing of the payments based on your cash flow forecast. So one last thing on taxes, it's worth mentioning, if you have made payments on account through self-assessment in January and you're expecting a significant drop in profits come March or come this financial year that's just finished, it will again be worth speaking to your client manager, because there is an opportunity to get your tax return for this year done nice and early and then resetting those payments on account, which potentially could lead to a refund for you. But given the real brunt of the coronavirus has only kicked in February and March, it might not be relevant for that many businesses, but it's still something to look at and consider. So I'll quickly go on to the government grants that have been announced. So a government grant of £10,000 has been proposed for those businesses that are in receipt of small business rate relief or rural rate relief. Further details that were published after state that only businesses eligible for those reliefs on the 11th of March 2020 will qualify. So anyone eligible for them after, or set up after, or moved into place after that will not qualify based on the government guidance. And I think someone mentioned in the Q&A box about if we're in a WeWork, for example, and they take care of the business rates. We did look into this, and it looks like that WeWork would be the company that are susceptible for the business rates, and they incorporate that as part of your rent. So I don't think you will be eligible. If you're eligible, the government will write to you, your local council will write to you and explain that you're eligible. Your grant will be given at whatever time it is. So if you've not got any documentation confirming that you're eligible for the small business rate relief, then it's unlikely you are. Having said that, we would recommend to speak to your local council just to clarify one way or the other, because it can't do any harm for the sake of a phone call. There are other grants available, but they're segregated for the retail, hospitality and leisure industries. So there's a potential grant for those industries of up to £25,000, where the rateable value is between 15 and 51,000. And for businesses with a rateable value above that in those industries, there's also instead they have a business rate holiday for the next 2 tax years. That business rate holiday also applies to nursery businesses as well. So if you're in the retail, hospitality and leisure sector, you're likely to get something back. If you haven't explored that already, we are urging you to contact your local council. Even though the government is saying you don't need to, we will write to you. I would be contacting them just to make sure that you're on the system and you won't get missed, so to speak. So moving on to self-employed, to give a brief overview of what's happened there. So the long-awaited announcement from the government confirmed that they were looking to bring parity to those furloughed workers in respect of self-employed people as well. So self-employed people will be able to apply for a grant worth 80% of their average monthly profits of the last 3 years, up to £2,500 a month. And this will run for a period of 3 months. It will be one payment into the self-employed person's bank account covering 3 months. That's all that's been announced in respect to that at the moment. Again, like everything else, it's subject to an extension, but at present, it's one payment covering 3 months. So at least 50% of your income has to come to self-employed, has to come from self-employed to qualify. And anyone who's missed the filing deadline has, I believe it's until the 23rd of April, so it was 4 weeks from the government announcement to get it done, and they will still qualify. So they're giving the late filers a little bit of an opportunity there. The scheme is only open to those self-employed people who earn under £50,000 a year. So the government have basically said that's nearly 80% of all self-employed people. Unlike the employee scheme, the self-employed can actually continue to work as they receive support. The money will arrive directly into people's bank accounts from HMRC, but it won't arrive until June at the earliest. And HMRC are in the process of inviting eligible people to apply online directly, and have released a statement basically saying, don't contact us about it because it will only slow down our process of getting our systems up to date. So at the moment, what we're urging to do is basically have a look at our self-employed calculator that we've prepared, and just to check your eligibility to gain an idea of how much you're expected to receive. We've had a lot of business owners that are set up through a limited company where they earn a small salary and a high dividend, and they are saying, are we eligible for this because we're theoretically self-employed? For this purpose, you're not self-employed. You're not classed as self-employed, so you will not be eligible for this unless you have separate self-employed income that accounts to 50% of your total income. So further options for self-employed people are looking at opportunities around the coronavirus business loan interruption scheme. Explore options with your local authority to receive a payment holiday for your own council tax bills. Taking advantage of the self-assessment and the VAT deferral, as we've mentioned, that also applies to self-employed. It's not just for limited companies. Explore your eligibility for universal credit. The government did mention that any advance claims for universal credit can be given out within a matter of days. So if you haven't already and you are on a low income, you live in the UK and you're under state pension age, and neither yourself or your partner have a savings of more than 16,000, it would be worth exploring your eligibility for universal credit. And finally, property. So emergency legislation came in place to suspend new evictions from social or private rented accommodation. So basically landlords are unable in the next 3 months to kick out tenants, even if they haven't paid the rent. And to balance this up, or in an effort to balance this up, the government have mentioned that 3-month mortgage payment holidays have been offered, and that has been extended to buy-to-let mortgages as well, because initially it was only released for residential. So it's actually for buy-to-lets as well. So landlords with residential tenants can take advantage of that. So that covers in a nutshell the majority of the initiatives. Now, onto the most significant initiative, the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme. And it's going to be really helpful to have Chris on here to speak afterwards, as he'll be able to give us a bank's perspective and help field anyone's questions specifically around the area. But before we go on and give Chris the chance to speak, I just want to run through a few key elements of this myself. So the first thing to know about this, and one of the most biggest misconceptions, is it's not a government loan. It's a scheme where banks and lenders can get security from the government where the client does not have enough security themselves, or the borrower does not have enough security themselves. We've had a bit more clarity in recent days around this, and the government have adjusted their criteria somewhat from the initial announcement in order to stimulate approvals, because the stats that came out were pretty damning, to say the least, on how many people have been accepted from this flagship scheme that's been announced. So to start with, you'd apply for a debt facility just as normal, and the lenders would assess the affordability. Should you be accepted under the scheme, you're likely to receive favourable terms, and we'll talk about the headline terms in a second. But probably the most important thing from my side right now is when our corporate finance team have been dealing with applications, they've reiterated that it's so important that the 10 essential pieces of information are there and ready, because we can't even begin applications without having those 10 bits of information. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read them out as slowly as possible to give people a chance to write them down. But if people don't have the ability to write them down now, they are included and separately mentioned in our pack. So just ping us over an email and we can send them to you directly if you don't have the pack, or we can send you the link to the pack. So the first thing that you'll need to have ready is the last 12 months bank statements. And if you bank with Lloyds, they're likely to require at least 6 months of your personal statements too. Some lenders will accept 6 months business bank statements, but to be safe, we recommend to just get 12 months anyway. They need to be either hard copies or PDF extracts from your online banking. So something exported from a bookkeeping package won't be sufficient for this. You also need your last 3 years filed accounts. You'll need up-to-date management accounts, ideally covering up to either the end of February or ideally the end of March. You'll need age debtors and age creditors lists, which again, if you're running a bookkeeping package, should be pretty straightforward to get. And if Nordens do the bookkeeping through A2Y, we can get those for you. Confirmation of any outstanding debt. So what they'll need to see is the provider, the term, and the repayment amount and time. A statement of your personal assets, liabilities, income and expenditure covering all directors. So this will not mean that you're personally guaranteeing anything, so don't panic, but it's for the lenders to basically build up an overall risk of lending profile for you. But also need the home address of all directors and key shareholders, their date of births and their contact details. For the coronavirus loan specifically, that every single lender will need a paragraph on how the coronavirus has affected their business, what the funds will specifically be used for, and how the basis has been calculated on what is needed. All the lenders are generally now asking for 12-month cash flow forecasts. So based on my earlier chat with you, or if you're preparing those already, that should come nice and easily. And then the amount required and what assumptions have been used arriving at that amount. So they're the key headline pieces of information. And the next bit of information is specific to the coronavirus loan, and it's quite comprehensive. It basically means if you have all this information, you'll pretty much be able to start an application with any lender. Some of them are a bit less heavy on the requirements. Some of them want every bit of information. So the main purpose of this additional information is to paint a picture of the need and the usage of the funds, while clarifying the outlook for the business. So it's sort of to reassure the lenders. So if I go through those, I'll be nearly done. But the good news is, if you've got a comprehensive cash flow forecast, you'll be able to help and answer a lot of these questions very, very easily. So what you'll need is, you'll need to explain in which specific area of your business the coronavirus has had its impact, and how the monies will be used to help the business through the period of disruption. Clarifying how you feel the borrowing will support the longevity of the business. confirm whether in your mind at this present time, and it's worth saying that a lot of this stuff is talking about the future, so you just be honest to the best of your ability right now as we stand. So confirm whether you feel further borrowing at a later date will be required. When the pandemic is over, how long do you think it will take for the business to recover? Again, a lot of this stuff will be illustrated in your forecast. What challenges do you expect to see, i.e. future loss of contracts, future staffing availability problems? What changes are the business making in short and longer term to help drive business performance back to pre-coronavirus levels? What was your annual sales turnover for 2019? Again, from your accounts, you'll be able to get that quite easily. What was your annual wage bill for 2019? Again, same thing. Provide the current number of employees. What are the costs you currently have to pay in regards to running the business? So the staffing costs, the premises costs, any other sort of cost. Again, from a comprehensive cash flow, that will be illustrated too. And finally, just provide details of what other support you've been able to get from the government, such as the grants, the rates, the VAT deferral, the time to pay that we've mentioned already. So if you didn't get all those down, don't worry too much. Again, we can get them over to you in a separate document. And our corporate finance team have been working quite closely with a lot of the lenders, and they've been providing some key information around the coronavirus loan itself. It is subject to change, but as things stand at the moment, these are the sort of headline illustrations around that loan. So the minimum loan is 25k. Anything under that, we're recommending all clients just approach their current bank and ask for an overdraft or a short-term loan facility, because it won't be eligible for the coronavirus initiative and incentives, anything underneath 25k. The maximum is 5 million, and the term will range from between 1 to 6 years. It's completely free for the first 12 months. So there's no arrangement fees, no interest fees, no security fees, and then afterwards a variable rate will apply. There is also, for certain lenders and subject to credit approval, a capital repayment holiday of up to 6 months. So theoretically, you could be granted this loan and not have to pay anything at all for 6 months on it, which is really, really lucrative. No early repayment fees either. So if you were looking to remortgage this loan or to clear this loan off at an earlier stage than the term expiry, you could clear it off without any repayment fees. And although the government have removed the restrictions, this was one of their key announcements last week on the security being necessary. So no PGs are necessary, no personal guarantees for any loans under 250,000. For any loan applications above that amount, the business would still need to be providing security for 20% of the full amount. So if you're applying for a £300,000 loan, you will still need to be providing some form of security for 20% of that. It is worth mentioning, though, that primary residence is excluded from the security that banks are able to take a charge over. Now, the final point is that a lot of banks are mentioning, or a lot of media speculation, that the loan amount itself will be either the higher of 25% of your 2019 turnover or double your wage bill. And Chris disagrees with this, and he'll elaborate when it comes on to him. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of where we're at from our point of view with the funding and the lending. We are here to help you. So if you haven't done anything and you are concerned, please speak to us, because the longer you leave it, every day is another day wasted, so to speak. So don't hesitate, just speak up. Hopefully that reiterates there are options out there in terms of government incentives and the funding. But as you can see, there's a lot of information we need to collate quickly to move with this. So we can't emphasize enough how important it is to have your books and records up to date and be ready to provide this information as and when necessary. So again, to summarize in 3 key steps from this part, based on your cash flow forecast, assess your need for funding using your pinch points and your buffer that you need. Ensure your books and records are fully up to date so the funding process is not slowed down unnecessarily. And where funding is needed, prepare all the documents ASAP. Even if you don't need funding right now, it will still be a worthwhile exercise, because then you'll have that information to hand to just provide as and when you do need it. So as mentioned, if anyone would like to speak to us separately directly after the call, we can schedule in a private call or conversation with your client manager here. Or if you want to have any specific questions right now, like Mitch said, put them in the Q&A box. But for now, that's it from me, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Chris.
Thanks, Joe. Like I said, we've got loads of questions, and I'm sure we'll have loads more once we've spoken to Chris. But if anyone wants any personal, private conversations, or wants to chat to anyone away from here, then feel free to send me an email, mitch@nordens.co.uk, and I'll get all your questions answered. Thanks, Joe. Chris, welcome. I need to unmute you. I'm trying to. You might need to unmute yourself. There we go. You're talking really quietly. You might need to talk into your microphone. But look, it's really, really good to have you on. It's like I said, there's not a lot of bank managers that are, been prepared to do this. So no, absolutely, really appreciate you coming on. Look, do you want to? I think let's start. I've got so many questions for you, and I think that there's people that are going to have questions. Well, people have got questions, which we'll come to at the end. But do you want to give your kind of your thoughts on what's going on at the moment from Metro, yours and Metro's perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully you can hear me okay now.
Just about.
Just about.
Maybe I'll turn the volume up. There you go. That's better.
Yeah. So hopefully you can all hear me now. Afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for your time. Joe, that was a great job in terms of summarising the C-bill scheme, and just a testament to Nordens and the team there in terms of how well you understand everything, because there's been something of a moving feast, and from a bank's point of view, I mean, most of these schemes went live 9 days ago, and then it's been subject to change a number of times ever since. I've had emails sent through this afternoon where things are being tweaked. So I think the one thing is, for all the businesses that are listening in today, is just to keep checking your own bank's COVID-19 element of their website, because there should all be a section on there about how they're supporting business customers, because any update will probably be on there before it's on anyone else. In terms of the civil scheme, sort of from a bank's point of view, and I can't obviously speak for the other banks, but I can sort of give you a steer on Metro, and I don't think the other banks will be hugely dissimilar. But the scheme itself was made available from the government. I think Rishi Sunak announced it probably 2 and a bit weeks ago now, and as I said, most banks got mobile on it probably last Monday. And so it's available for loans, overdrafts, asset finance and invoice finance, but not every lender that's accredited under the British Business Bank is able to provide all products. So to give you a steer, at Metro Bank, we're only providing business loans. So we're not doing overdrafts or asset finance or invoice finance under the civil scheme. But if any businesses are approaching us looking for overdrafts, then that would just be considered a business as usual commercial loan inquiry, and therefore wouldn't be part of the way that the civils are priced, with the interest holidays and capital repayment holidays for the first 6 months. So it's important just to understand from your own bank, whoever you bank with, whether they're supplying overdrafts as part of this scheme or whether it's just small business loans. And the other thing is, wherever you bank, you have to approach your own bank first. Now, that might be difficult. The banks are fairly swamped. I mean, my team of business managers are on the phone from morning, noon and night, as am I at the moment. And I was sort of ducking out and answering emails and text messages throughout this video call before I've even managed to get on. But you have to go and speak to your own bank first, because that's where the relationship is. So with Metro Bank customers, we're looking after our own transactional banking customers and taking applications and inquiries from them. I've had approaches from people that bank outside of Metro Bank, and at the moment, the steer is that you have to go and speak to your own relationship manager and start the process there. It may well be a case that if you haven't got a relationship manager, or there isn't much of a relationship with your current bank, on the British Bank website, it does say, British Business Bank website, it does say that you can approach another lender within the scheme. But I would just reiterate, you really need to try and exhaust all avenues with your own bank first before approaching another lender. Because there's so much demand and so much stretch, there's only so much bandwidth that each bank has got in terms of dealing with these inquiries quickly and efficiently, because we appreciate that a lot of companies at the moment, cash is starting to run out. But the one thing I really want to stress is this isn't a silver bullet to suddenly make all of your cash flow needs go away. So if it was a business that was struggling prior to coronavirus hitting, the likelihood is, if you weren't able to get a business loan or any kind of borrowing from your bank maybe in December or January, the likelihood is it would still be a struggle now, even though coronavirus has had an impact on the business. So I did just want to kind of stress that. Rishi Sunak did say this is about a viable business, and we need to make sure that when you are applying, that the business was viable pre-COVID-19 hitting, and that actually you can then sort of evidence that it has had an impact, it's sort of affected your cash flow, but you would be in a position to trade out of it afterwards. So one of the things we're doing at Metro Bank, we've got an eligibility checklist, which might be easier if I send it on to Mitch to then circulate round after the call. But it's a number of questions that each business, when you're approaching, and most banks will probably have something similar, but it is about making sure that actually it fits within the bank's criteria, and that you have exhausted all other avenues. You've gone and spoken and tried to get the help from government grants. You've furloughed staff where applicable. You've spoken to HMRC to make sure that you've got VAT deferments and any corporation tax deferred. Your local council has come to you to advise on business rates. And actually, if you've got any borrowing, whether it's asset finance or business loan, invoice finance, pretty much all lenders are offering payment holidays, or they certainly should be. And if they're not, you can sort of run it up the flagpole with that particular business. But yeah, all banks, certainly we are, and all the others are offering sort of interest holidays, payment holidays, whether that's overdrafts on asset or invoice finance or on business loans. So again, if you've got some borrowing out there in the name of the business, make sure you speak to your lender and try and arrange one of those payment holidays through your relationship manager. So those are the kind of things that you need to make sure you've done before you can sort of then approach, and then as well, sort of just make sure that what it is you're actually approaching the bank for is viable, it's realistic, and it is something that the business can afford. If you're a business turning over 250 grand and you want to borrow $500,000 under the CBIL scheme, it's probably unlikely that you're going to get it, because there are these couple of sort of criterias in terms of the amount that you're looking to borrow against the turnover of the business in the last full set of annual accounts, and twice the annual salary. And actually, if the amount is exceeding that, it's unlikely that the business will be able to prove serviceability to be able to repay the borrowing. So what no bank is going to do under this is start throwing money at businesses because the business said it needs X pounds. It needs to be substantiated. The cash flow forecast, which I've heard been mentioned numerous times on this webinar, which is just so important, has to demonstrate that actually the bottom of the trough in 3 or 4 months' time, when you're really feeling the pinch point, depending on how long this goes on for, is a realistic number. And that coincides with the number that you are approaching the bank to borrow, and that actually there are sufficient profits in the business or cash in the bank that you can repay this loan. Because in 6 months' time, when the capital kicks in, we don't want to see a load of businesses go into the wall, and then it might be quite difficult for the banks to then approach the government for the security element of the 80%, which is, and that's where it kicks in. It's in the event that anything goes horribly wrong, that's when the government guarantee scheme will kick in at 80%, but the banks don't want to be lending money out the door at the moment for businesses to potentially then keel over in 6 months' time when the first capital payment comes in. So it's really important that when you are approaching your lender, it's with a realistic amount, and that sort of weighs up with the cash flow forecast in terms of showing the need and being able to articulate the actual effect that the COVID-19 virus has had on your business. So if you're in construction and you're sort of one of the subcontracting firms on a large site and the site's closed, then absolutely the coronavirus has had a huge impact on the business. If all of your stock is manufactured in China, again, there's suddenly no stock for you to sell, so therefore your income has completely gone off a cliff. So these are the kind of things that you'd need to articulate to your relationship manager in the bank, so that when they're putting forward the application into the credit team, there is a viable need and rationale as to why we're being approached under the CBIL scheme. It's a coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, so it's about business interruption. It's not to be used for expansion. It's not to be used to bridge wages while we're waiting for the furlough scheme to kick out from the government, unfortunately, which is a number of requests I've had in the last couple of weeks. But it is about business interruption and helping you trade through the next few weeks, few months, however long this virus continues to take hold, and then see you out the other side, so that then you can continue to trade and then start repaying back to the lender. Just a couple of other things to sort of touch on. Joe was talking about the amount of documentation and information that banks need to be able to assess the viability and put a proposal into the credit teams. So he's spot on with all the information that's needed. So I think when that list of information, that shopping list, is circulated round. But I think for me, the most important things are certainly the last 2 years full accounts, if you have those. If you've only been trading for a year, 18 months, that can still be looked into, but we'd certainly, in an ideal world, be looking for 2 years worth of annual accounts, and that's the profit and loss and balance sheet, as well as then sort of the notes. Then looking at latest management figures. So often people's year ends might be now coming up to anything up to 18 months ago. So that's quite historic. So we would be looking for the last 12 months management accounts. And again, this is something that the good folk at Nordens will be able to produce for you very quickly. But if you use Xero, QuickBooks, Sage, any online accountancy software, you should be able to get somebody to pull off your profit and loss and balance sheet for the last 12 months, as well as then an up-to-date debtor and creditor list. Cash flow forecast, again, is key. So looking at actually, what's the impact of COVID had on the business? What have you done in terms of furloughing staff and taking out those staff costs? And then looking at just the requirement and how deep the trough goes into the red for the support that you need. And just to pick up again on sort of the asset and liability statement, because again, when we've asked customers for this, there's been a lot of pushback because, quite rightly, they're picking up on the fact that these loans are, certainly if it's under 250,000, there's no security needed. So there's no personal guarantee needed. Therefore, why do you need to know what my asset and liabilities are personally as a director? Which is a fair challenge. The reason why banks will ask for it, and certainly the reason why we ask for them at Metro Bank, is so that they build up a picture of the individual or individuals behind the business. So what have you done? Are you taking out lots of dividends? Do you own assets? Is there some cash in the background? It's not to take security over like it would have been under a normal loan scheme, but it is actually just to paint a picture so that when an application goes into credit, it's not always just about the affordability of the loan, but it's about building up a picture to the underwriters to say, ABC Limited has been going for a number of years. The directors behind it are of good means. This is how much they have in terms of their asset base. And it just provides a bit more comfort to underwriters as to, ultimately, it's the directors that run the business. So if we can get comfortable with them, it helps us get comfortable with the business and the business's ability to pay. So if you are wondering why you're being asked for an asset and liability statement, that's more than likely the reason why, not just to try and take a personal guarantee. That was the big change that the government announced, because there were some banks going out and insisting on PGs regardless of the amount, which wasn't in keeping with the scheme. So, so no PGs up to 250 grand unless you're borrowing less than 25. Therefore, that's part of the normal bank's lending criteria. And then, yeah, any loans over 250,000, there is then that element that you need to be able to evidence that you can provide 20% worth of security on that loan. Again, should it be called on in a default scenario, but primary residences are not included in that. So you won't have to worry about the roof over your head being snatched away and you and your family suddenly being made homeless if it all went horribly wrong. I think that was probably about it. Mitch,
I've got some questions, or I've got some things that I want to run by you, and then I think we'll go to the questions that we've got, because otherwise we could, I think you and I could probably talk all day.
Yeah.
But look, I read a statistic. I think a statistic was released, so a lot of people probably read it, that something like 150 applications, 150 applications to the banks for finance. Sorry, 150,000 applications. Only about 1,000 have been approved. What's your experience on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I read the statistic as well, and it looked fairly grim if you're in the banking world, because it just looks like no banks are actually lending. Whereas if there was ever a time that the banks need to be able to provide support, it's now.
Yeah.
Personal view, when the business secretary was giving his update and sort of said, the banks, we bailed you all out in 2008, therefore you need to help. I don't think that was massively helpful, because the government hadn't necessarily provided a full steer on how the banks should be going about sort of these civil loan applications. But that's a bit more of a personal view. I think at the moment it's difficult to put a steer on the statistics, because a lot of applications will fall over at the first hurdle, because a lot of people have misinterpreted exactly what this facility was to be used for, and that it is a case that the business needed to be viable before you approach the bank. So actually there are a lot of business applications coming in my experience, where businesses that have only been trading for 3 or 4 months therefore can't evidence the fact that they could repay a facility, or businesses where they're insolvent or loss making. It suddenly means that there's no way we can evidence that a loan facility could be repaid. So as much as the headline was fairly damning, there wasn't really any detail just to say what the quality of those applications was like, because if 100,000 viable businesses applied and only a couple of thousand received funding, then that's horrific. So it's always just the nervousness with statistics. There's always a lot of information behind that.
Fair enough. Good answer. Very good answer.
But what I would say is, look, the more information and quality information that accountants like yourselves, and I do work with a couple of other accountants as well, they're very proactive with their client base. And again, if you're providing a decent suite of information in terms of the management figures, the accounts, a decent cash flow, and packaging that all up together, it makes the lender and the relationship manager's job so much more easier to be able to paint the picture for credit. Because the credit teams at all the banks are going to be under massive pressure to get funds out the door, but to get the right funds out the door. So the more quality information we can get up front, the easier it makes it, and then the smoother this process then becomes.
Thank you. And I think I understand that banks, they only want to lend to viable businesses, which is fair enough. And that the government has said it should be based on looking backwards at the accounts. But with the current situation, lots of what were strong companies who have basically stopped trading during this time, with their cash flows being non-existent. Are you interested in talking to them and basing your lending effectively on the past rather than where they currently are, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so what sort of the ideal cutoff point is kind of December 19, end of last year. So if the business was proven that it was trading well, that there was money in the business, that there was a solvent balance sheet, that there's profits being made and retained, then that's before coronavirus started to spread or have an impact on anyone. Therefore, we're looking back, yes, but making sure that the business would have been able to repay the loan had the money been lent at the back end of last year. Then taking into account what the impact has been on the business moving forward. So in terms of what's happened, is it the supply chain? Is it the fact that they can't generate their product, sell their product, or what have you? Over the last 3 months, we've had the impact, and that's where the cash flow position is so important. And then looking at actually, have they stripped out all their, as many costs as they can, so that actually we're funding working capital and fixed costs where they can't actually defer any of those payments. So looking backward gives you a steer, but in terms of whether the business was viable before, but actually it's the importance of looking at what the cash flow looks like and can the business repay. As I say, the important milestone will be month 7 when the capital holiday has finished, and then there's that first capital payment, which could be fairly substantial, and the business would need to be able to evidence that it can afford to pay that.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks, Chris. And I think it's fairly evident that some sectors are being hit more than others, such as hospitality. And they're sectors that you or Metro, well, you can't really speak for other banks, but let's just say Metro that aren't really interested in working with at the moment.
Only the ones that fall outside of the scheme. And that's sort of, I think it's charities. There's a list of sort of businesses which is on the British Business Banking website which aren't eligible. But any trading business, there's not sort of any sectors that we're not able to look at, if that makes sense. So whether it's contractors, whether it's IT, whether it's catering, whether it's building, recruitment, it's I think the virus is having an effect in nearly every sector.
So it will purely depend on accounts and forecasts from a financial point of view.
Yeah, and it's on a case-by-case basis, certainly.
So you will lend to hospitality, potentially?
Yes, yeah, and we've got a big hospitality team that are based out of our head office in Holborn, and they've been working night and day to work with existing customers that we've lent money into, pub chains, restaurant chains.
That's interesting.
Look at refinance options and payment holiday options in the first instance.
Okay.
To help them through the initial bit, but yeah.
And are you open for businesses asking for further loans? Because, for example, what if it gets to the stage where the first loan wasn't enough?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is, and the only reason I can sort of answer is because on one of the credit papers that I'm in the middle of putting together, there's already been one application through which will qualify as sort of a CBIL loan. But they will be looking for another one in sort of 3 months' time once the sort of initial bit runs out, depending on how long the shutdown goes for. So if you apply once, that's not your kind of only shot. You can reapply for extended facilities again further down the line, depending on how long this goes on for. Yeah.
Okay. And how long is it taking Metro to make decisions? Obviously, it's a critical time. people need quick decisions.
Yeah, and I'd love to be able to give you a cast iron answer. I think on receipt of all of the documentation, so I've had a documentation suite in today, that will go into credit tomorrow. You know, decision would probably be within about 3 to 4 working days, just given the fact that we've got Easter break coming up. But up to a week in terms of getting the decision, I would have said, on the basis of receiving all of the information. Sometimes there's just quite a bit of back and forth in terms of not quite having all of the right documentation up front.
Yeah.
Yeah, on receipt of a full information pack, then probably a week to get the decision, and then it's then sort of getting paperwork out to be signed to send back. So, you know.
So I guess to make quick decisions, I guess you're just reiterating what Joe was saying before about just make sure you've got everything up to date and all the information ready for potentially a week to a week's answer. Okay. Because most of the time is spent going backwards and forwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing is, banks will not approve every application. They just won't, unfortunately. Because again, go back to the point, not every business is necessarily definitely viable or showing the ability to repay the facility. Therefore, they're unlikely to fall outside of the bank's lending criteria. But, without, sort of turning any customers away, but, your bank isn't your only funding option out there. It's the first one you need to go to, but there are a number of alternative funders out there. And I know Joe's team has got a list because there was a client I wasn't able to help, that they potentially are able to help through another means. So yes, your bank needs to be your first approach, but if you're not successful, don't necessarily think that's it. There are other funding options out there and other funders which would have less stringent criteria than a bank underwriter would.
Thank you, Chris. Listen, I really appreciate you coming on. I think let's go to questions and answers. But if anyone wants to speak to Chris, let me know and I'll do an introduction if that's all right with you, Chris. But I think I'll unmute Michael, I'll unmute Joe. I think I've got a lot of questions to get through. Some for, mainly Chris, Joe, Michael. No one wants to ask me anything, which is fine. So look, first question. The government is saying that banks will assist small businesses with loans. Have the banks relaxed any criteria in order to get a loan? I guess that's to Chris.
Yeah, I'll try and answer that one. So I think where this has come from, and certainly I saw an awful lot on social media, on Twitter, sort of a week or so ago, and this was mainly around the personal guarantee piece, and the fact that banks were trying to get security and anything to hang their hat on for any amount, which wasn't necessarily in keeping with the scheme and the way that the government set it out. So I think the main change has been around security and definitely not needing to take security on any borrowing up to 250,000. I think the other thing was, some banks were just told to look at standard lending criteria only, and I think that's something that then isn't necessarily applicable given the fact that it's a CBIL scheme and it's for a specific purpose of business interruption. So I think the other thing that has changed is that the banks are, urged to look and consider the CBIL scheme, but fundamentally, the business still has to have, and demonstrate the ability to repay the borrowing, because otherwise, it's the bank will be putting them in a worse position, and ultimately, the bank will be in a poor position by not being able to get the debt repaid in the short or medium term. So
for anything, and for the coronavirus loan, you still need to provide all the information. They're not going to relax anything, basically.
No, and I think where it's then a bit like the EFG scheme that was, where this then is then a potential problem for the bank is if I lend you and your company 200,000 and then you go hot in a year's time, if all the due diligence hasn't been done properly, the government might push back and say, well, we're not going to give you the 80,000, you can take the full loss, or 80%, sorry. So you might, so the bank, you can take the full loss. So that's why there's just a bit more stringent criteria on this CBIL scheme, because it's the government that are ultimately providing the security if it all goes wrong.
Okay, no, thank you. Thanks, Chris. Do you know, I think this is ones for Joe. Do you know what government support is available for freelancers who operate as a limited company and pay themselves the majority through dividends?
Yeah, so this is sort of what we covered this kind of in part when I was talking earlier, but basically at the moment, limited company directors don't qualify as self-employed, so they're not able to access the employed grant, but what they can do is they can, in theory, furlough themselves, providing they're not going to continue to work, so they can get 80% of their current PAYE salary back. They can also explore opportunities to get universal credit, like I mentioned previously, and also looking at the other ways of managing their cash through the coronavirus loan scheme that we've been talking about, assessing their availability for government grants depending on the business that they're in, and also I think just looking at payment deferrals. So they are kind of the worst hit, so to speak. There isn't anything specific for those because their predominant income is through dividends, and that has not really been what the government have not really targeted that as a kind of a compromise measure. So right now, that is the best thing to do. But like I emphasised right at the start, I think the main and most important thing to do is do that cash flow forecast so you can actually see where you are. And if you'd like a private discussion around that, then just speak to us offline afterwards.
But right now, the government haven't done anything with regards to
not
to
specifically
dividends.
other than the furlough and the other things I've mentioned, no.
Yeah. Can a company director be furloughed but still market the business?
Yeah, I saw that question on the Q&A, and I think that's sort of it's a difficult one to give a comprehensive answer to because there isn't specific guidance. And in theory, everything you do is marketing your business to an extent if you want to be really wide-ranging about it. So what I would say my gut feeling, and from looking at guidance from the corporate bodies we've been working with, I would say in theory, providing the marketing effort is immaterial or small, I would say that would generally be okay and would not be classed as working. If it is providing a quote or leading to actually direct income from what you're doing, I would say that wouldn't qualify, and that would take you off your ability to furlough. So I would say exercise caution, but as long as the marketing is relatively small and it's not comprehensive and it's not directly done for a purpose of raising income, then I think it would probably be okay. It's just one where you have to kind of adopt a common sense approach right now based on the lack of real clarity around that. But generally, when you're furloughing, you should be doing limited to no work in essence.
Okay, thanks. It's quite a difficult question to answer because no one
Yeah.
really knows. Partners, are they classified as self-employed? They would be, wouldn't they?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Cool. Let me just... Done. Okay. So if there was any HMRC, if there was any outstanding debt, which was occurred prior to 2020, okay. The question is can you defer old debts to HMRC as well as anything new that's going to be outstanding to HMRC?
The answer is potentially. It's definitely worth having the conversation with them around it. It's not set in stone around old debts. They've generally made it quite clear around current and recent debts. But in terms of old debts, they are open to help businesses. I was speaking to them about corporation tax, and they did mention they will look at old debts. But what they're urging, don't bury your head in the sand. You need to make contact with us because every day that goes past is going to limit your chances of actually us agreeing something with you.
The feedback I'm getting from the revenue is they're being extremely flexible with time to pay, but you actually do need to make contact. So I believe the answer to that question is they will give time to pay for old debts. However, it will be on a case-by-case basis with the revenue. Chris, have any Metro customers actually drawn down on any loans to date, coronavirus loans to date?
Great question. I can only speak for my team as business managers. I know that there's been some facilities agreed. Whether they've been drawn down or not, that I don't know. Like I say, our scheme went live last Monday, and there's been a number of a huge influx of inquiries that came in. My team have got 75 ongoing cases at the moment between 3 of them, and then there's sort of 15 times that just in London in terms of the business managers. So they're all probably having a similar amount. So yes, some facilities have been agreed. I'm afraid, honestly, I don't know if any have been drawn. Not for my team at the moment, but certainly some of the commercial functions that are based out of our head office that look after the hospitality sector, real estate, and they probably have got some out the door. But if you want me to find out specifically, happy for Mitch to pass on my details, and I can go away and find that out for you.
Yeah, I will do an introduction. There's another question which I will, which they've asked as well. So I'll do an introduction to you both. See where it goes. The loans are only approved if all other lending, overdraft, bank loan, and everything like that from your bank is not available. Therefore, you may be charged a higher rate than the actual coronavirus loan scheme because your bank will offer another means of finance. Is that correct?
I mean, I think the pricing for the civils, I mean, again, I can only speak for Metro, but our funding on loans up to 250,000, is 6.25% margin ahead of a base rate of 0.1. So 6.35%, which is it's not a racy price. I mean, I think there were some rates being banded around that were sort of north of 15% and things like that with some of the other banks a week or so ago. So my view is, if you're treating customers fairly, you're putting them on the most sort of, useful tariff. And if they're CBIL eligible, then it should be going on the CBIL scheme, not being put onto a normal commercial rate where the bank might then price things slightly differently. So I'm afraid I can't sort of give a definitive, but I think, each bank has they have to kind of treat their customers fairly and certainly not be trying to strike people up, certainly not in this day and age and what everybody's going through. So for me, it has to be to fairly and accordingly. And if it's a CBIL related scheme, it should be priced on the CBIL scheme, not on anything more than that.
Thanks, Chris. Joe, what would you say to someone who's being challenged on their rent? For example, their biggest cost is office rent, but the landlords are refusing to offer any discounts as they want them to pay with the grant that they're going to receive. Obviously, if they do that, then they're going to have nothing left to pay any other costs or to even live. They've got 6 months left on the lease. They're going to give notice just in case. But what do you think they should do?
Well, again, like I've kind of mentioned before about the cash flow, I think let's have a look at that cash flow with that particular person, see what it looks like, both for the 3 months and for the 6 months. But the government haven't mentioned the initiative that landlords are not able to kick out commercial tenants at this present moment. So they are safe and secure, so to speak, for the next 3 months, even if they don't make payment. Having said that, you want to try and come to some sort of compromise with them. And I don't know when they had the discussion with the landlord. It might have been before the government announcement. I'm not too sure, but it would be worth reapproaching them and potentially looking at negotiating to saying, look, we're going to be in here for the next 3 months anyway. Let's come up with some sort of compromise where it's fair and we can actually continue trading, so we can actually give you the best chance of receiving your money for the whole of the remaining lease term, this whole 6 months, rather than just saying, right, well, 3 months and then you can kick us out, but you're not going to get any money then. So I think it's just another conversation, but they are protected in that sense. They're not going to be able to be kicked out within the next 3 months anyway.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Joe. But I've got some more questions, and then people have emailed me questions as well, which we'll go through. Can furloughed staff work on maintenance work for the company remotely, such as working on the stock system in my case? I think so. That's kind of the grey area that Joe was explaining before. That's not fee earning income. Would you say it's not really providing a service, is it, Joe? Would you say that's...
Yeah, I'd sort of agree. I mean, you've got to look at it as well. It depends on the level of work you're doing on the stock system. If you are basically working on the stock system because the person who usually works on the stock system is furloughed and you're trying to furlough yourself, I think when it does get audited, if it was to be looked at and it was basically, you were basically doing a full-time job working on that stock system, it might come in for some critique. But again, like you said, it's not one of those things that can be directly attributed to fee generation and revenue generation, so to speak. So I'd say the risk is relatively low, but again, I think it's the volume of work you're doing that needs to be considered as well.
Yeah, no, fair point. Next question. Let me just. What if you don't have 3 years worth of self-employed income to access the grant?
Yeah, so it basically what they've said is if you've got 3 years, it'll be the average of the 3 years. If you've only got 2 years, it'll be the average of the 2 years. And if you've just got 1 year, providing that year is 2018-19, it will be your 1 year. 1920, it's worth mentioning, is not being considered under any circumstances for this. So although it would be good to get your books and records up to date for various other reasons, to rush your tax return in right this second to get a grant off the back of it will not happen. They're not going to put 1920 in as part of this grant whatsoever. So just to clarify that, because I don't think I mentioned it when I talked earlier.
Okay, thank you, Joe. I know Michael's going to have to go. Michael, thank you for joining us. I have got emails, which I'm going to move on to now, of asking for introductions to you. So I will make those introductions, but just want to say thank you for joining the call.
Pleasure, mate. My daughters are trying their best to join the call as well. So
thanks, Michael.
I'm going to jump off. So thanks, guys. Cheers, Chris. Take care, Joe. Bye, Mitch.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Chris, last question.
Okay.
Is Metro taking on new business customers at the moment?
Always.
I'll do an introduction. I will do an introduction.
Yeah, so look, the only caveat would be, I mean, I've been approached by two new businesses this morning that want to move their banking over. They're not affected by civils and don't need to apply for a civils loan. So I think if it's a case of you want to move and apply for civils, it's probably not the right time. You should still go and speak to your current bank about that. But if it's a case of there isn't actually a debt requirement, or you're setting up a new company or a separate venture and are looking for a new banking relationship, then look, be delighted to have that conversation and yeah, run with it myself or pass over to one of my business managers, depending on whereabouts you're based.
Excellent. And I have got another question, but I'm not going to answer it. I'm going to do an introduction instead. But I think, yeah, look, for everyone, thank you for whoever tuned in. I hope it's been really helpful. We will keep doing them because the feedback we're getting is brilliant and it's helping businesses. So I just want to say thanks once again for joining in. Joe, thank you. Chris, thank you so much for joining in. And I hope to see you all. We will release a recording of this as well. It has been recording, even with Joe not turning up on time. But look, guys, any feedback, anything you want covering, drop an email. If you want the pack, to go out, which has the cash flow forecasts, it's got break-even analysis on. It's got everything the banks require. It's got what the grants, all the grants need, what you need to provide for grants. It's got absolutely everything that you need to think about during this time. Drop us an email, mitch@nordens.co.uk. I'll get the pack out to you, and hopefully it will help. Great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers, Mitch. Cheers, Joe. Thank you.